Welcome to The Explainer. You know, in 1946, the world was just starting to breathe after a devastating war. But the battle lines for the next conflict, they were already being drawn. Not on some battlefield, but in paper and ink. Today, we're diving into two secret documents that basically wrote the script for the entire Cold War. It sounds kind of crazy, right? How can two memos, two telegrams, shape a global struggle that lasts for 45 years? Well, these weren't just any old government papers. They were a diagnosis, a warning, and a prophecy all rolled into one. And they completely framed the mindset of the world's two new superpowers for generations. To really get it, though, we have to go back to the moment they were written. So picture this. World War II is ending, but the Grand Alliance that defeated Nazi Germany, it's falling apart at the seams. You could feel it at conferences like Yalta and Potsdam. And at Potsdam, when President Truman just casually tells Stalin about the new American atomic bomb, well, the trust between them wasn't just broken, it was shattered. And once their common enemy was gone, the US and the USSR were just left staring each other down across this massive ideological divide. By 1946, the air was just thick with suspicion. Teamwork was out, and confrontation was in. You had leaders in both Washington and Moscow asking the exact same urgent question. What are these guys really up to? What do they truly want? Are we dealing with a partner or a future enemy? To get answers, they turned to their men on the ground. Okay, so let's start with Washington. How did they see things? Turns out, their entire view was about to be shaped by one diplomat, stationed right in the heart of Moscow. That diplomat was George F. Kennan. He gets this request from the U.S. Treasury. Hey, can you explain why the Soviets are being so difficult? His response was, well, it wasn't brief. He sends back an 8,000-word cable. I mean, can you even imagine? That lands on desks in Washington like an absolute bombshell. It immediately became legendary as the long telegram. And the core of his message was, frankly, terrifying. Kennan argued that the Soviet Union wasn't just another country. He said it was a political force driven by a fanatical belief system that saw the outside world as an enemy. He basically told Washington, look, these guys believe that for them to be secure, our way of life has to be destroyed. Kennan's diagnosis was just bleak. He said the USSR was fueled by this deep, almost neurotic insecurity, and that it saw itself as surrounded by hostile capitalists. Because of this, you couldn't reason with them, you couldn't trust them. He saw the Soviet Union as this expansionist force, like a river that would just keep pushing outwards until it hit a solid wall. And his solution? You have to build that wall. It had to be contained. And that one word, contained, would go on to define American foreign policy for the next 40 years. But here's the wild part. Kennan's telegram wasn't the only one being written. While Washington was desperately trying to figure out Moscow's game plan, Moscow was doing the exact same thing, just in the other direction. Just 7 months after the long telegram, the Soviet ambassador in Washington, a guy named Nikolai Novikov, got the same assignment but in reverse. Explain America. And the cable he sends back to the Kremlin is this fascinating and honestly chilling counterpart to Kennan's. And just listen to how similar this sounds, but with all the ideologies flipped. Where Kennan saw a fanatical communist threat, Novikov saw imperialistic American capitalism. He told Moscow that the U.S. wasn't interested in a peaceful world order. It was striving for world supremacy. And Novikov's read on American actions was just as grim. He saw the massive U.S. military buildup, the network of bases around the world, and he saw a clear plan to encircle the Soviet Union. He argued that all that economic aid, things like the Marshall Plan, wasn't about charity. It was a weapon to make other countries dependent on America. From Moscow's point of view, it looked like the U.S. was getting ready for a future war, to wipe them off the map. So let's just pause here. You have these two stark, deeply suspicious reports landing on the desks of the most powerful leaders on the planet. What happens when you put them together? This is really the heart of the whole thing. The two reports were perfect mirror images of each other. Each side saw the other as an aggressive, expansionist force driven by a hostile ideology that wanted nothing less than global domination. Each side was convinced the other saw them as an obstacle that had to be eliminated. It was just a perfect, terrifying feedback loop of fear. And Kennan's diagnosis in the long telegram directly led to this policy, containment. The logic was simple, but it had massive consequences. You couldn't go to war with the USSR without risking a nuclear holocaust, and you couldn't reason with them. So what do? You build a wall, a political, economic, and military wall, and you patiently apply counterpressure, waiting for the Soviet system to eventually collapse. This became the playbook for everything, from the Truman Doctrine all the way to the Vietnam War.
Now, of course, it's not like these two telegrams single-handedly caused the Cold War. The distrust was already there. But what they did was crucial. They gave leaders the intellectual justification, basically the permission to turn all that suspicion into official government policy. They made confrontation seem not just possible, but necessary. And that leaves us with this huge question, one that goes way beyond 1946. When two major powers become convinced that their very survival depends on the other's downfall, and their most trusted experts are telling them exactly that, is a massive conflict inevitable, or is there another way out?